At the beginning, it was really just my personal drive of like, I really want to learn this. I have to learn this for my job. Let's just do the best out of it and share this experience. It's not your main job, right? Like a lot of content creators, their main job is not creating content for YouTube. They are not getting paid to create content on YouTube, right? At the beginning especially, I mainly focused on the content itself and my learning experience. So it was, at the beginning, the main intention was really like, I want to learn this new technology. It wasn't kind of teaching other people and educating the community of what I was doing and what this technology is and how they can get started. Came kind of second. Now that shifted a bit over the past year, I would say. If people really want to have the best learning experience, I would suggest them to write. I create to every video that I put on YouTube a blog post. Then you move on to the next content and then to the next content, right? And it keeps going. And a lot of YouTubers experience this kind of upload content creation fatigue. You should have told me before I could have practiced, you know?
Hey Anais, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm good as well. Anais, you did a very interesting thing early on in your YouTube journey and your Kubernetes journey is that you committed to 100 days of Kubernetes. Like you put out video content of whatever you were learning.
Yeah.
So how did you come to that decision?
That's an amazing question. So when I got started in the cloud native space, I was working for a startup called Codefresh. And at the time, I hardly had any social media presence. I had a few hundred followers from my time in the blockchain space. However, those followers weren't interested in cloud native content. At the time, I saw some of my coworkers, they were producing content on their social media channels, such as YouTube, on Twitter. And I thought, hey, I want to do it as well. The problem was that I hardly knew what Kubernetes or cloud native technologies were. So I really had to start kind of from scratch with everything. And then I came across some other communities online, such as 100 Days of Cloud. And one person in particular whom I was following, his name is Rishabh, he was producing weekly content, daily content for that. So I thought, hey, this is amazing. Like he's just across 100 days, he's learning about cloud providers, how to use them, how to navigate their platforms, and how to use ultimately the resources that he's provisioning through them. So I thought, hey, I can do the same with Kubernetes. I don't have to know what Kubernetes is in order to do a challenge online, right? Like you don't have to be an expert in any technology to get started and create content about that technology. So at the time, I was just sitting down, really, like my first YouTube videos, I'm just sitting down and I'm detailing my experience getting started with Kubernetes as well as different technologies. And then it happened from there. So I actually did officially up to day 44, but then I kept going on my blog posts, like on my blog platform. So they are around, I would say, like 65 days now, and I'm still continuing. At the beginning, it was really a daily thing, but then you realize you can't keep it up on a daily basis to produce both a blog post and a video, right? So it kept happening like every week kind of thing. Yeah.
Interesting. So you mentioned that you could not sustain that thing. But even for the first 30, 40 days, what kept you going? Like the next upload, the next upload, the next upload, what kept you going?
Yeah, it's actually one of the problems when you're a content creator. And I think you can probably relate to that, right? You create this content, you put like probably at least 3 hours, I would assume, into this kind of podcast, right? And then you're done, you upload it, people see it, they cheer for it, they're excited about the content, right? But then you move on to the next content and then to the next content, right? And it keeps going. And a lot of YouTubers experience this kind of upload content creation fatigue, right? Because it's different to other jobs or other responsibilities and work-related activities that you do where you really build up to a big release or some big celebration, and then it happens and everybody's excited, and then you usually have kind of a break or like a slower period, right? Like a slower paced period where you maybe work less or do other things, right? But for content creators, it's really like one thing after the other. So at the beginning, it was really just my personal drive of like, I really want to learn this. I have to learn this for my job. Let's just do the best out of it and share this experience with the community, right? And then from there, I think it was really like the input that I got from different community members that kept me going. Since like just for myself, to be honest, I wouldn't necessarily continue doing it on a regular basis. But the fact that so many people shared their successes that they got through watching my content and just their interest in my content with me, that it just, that excitement and seeing how much value other people derive from your work, that really kept me at least going up to now. Yeah.
Did you not get burnt out creating so much content, learning every day and creating content?
I think I got burnt out towards the end of last year, mid-end of last year. I wouldn't necessarily call it a burnout, since I've experienced once, like at the beginning of my career, real burnout that had nothing to do with content creation. It was just pure work burnout, and that is not fun. Like if you need like a year or more to recover from a state of extreme work fatigue, that's really exhausting, right? But yeah, so mid last year, actually, I wasn't quite sure what I want to do on my YouTube channel. I had lots of personal things going on, and I think that combination, that was really tiring. Now it's better. Now I also like, I think it's really like about learning to be kind to yourself and tell yourself, like, see, if you have other things going on, it's not your main job, right? Like a lot of content creators, their main job is not creating content for YouTube. They are not getting paid to create content on YouTube, right? Like as part of my job, I also have to do conferences and other things. And sometimes YouTube content and blog content and so on is then become second, right? And for example, last month, I didn't create any content. And that was also quite intentionally because I didn't want to get into the state of being burnt out. But instead I focus on conferences, and now I have so many ideas of creating new content from this off period that I think it ultimately will make the channel more valuable and more fun. But yeah, I think it's really like this balance between both.
Mhm. Interesting. When folks are usually learning in public, they tend to put out blog posts, Twitter threads, but you picked up a different thing, video. So video content requires production time as well, right? It requires intros, outros, editing. So while you are learning, the main focus was to learn. So did you also focus on the video aspect of things while putting out content, or it was just plain simple tutorials?
That's a great question. So at the beginning, especially, I mainly focused on the content itself and my learning experience. So it was at the beginning, the main intention was really like, I want to learn this new technology. It wasn't like kind of teaching other people and educating the community of what I was doing and what this technology is and how they can get started came kind of second. Now that shifted a bit over the past year, I would say. So obviously creating content, a lot of time goes into, like you mentioned, into the editing part, which is not part of creating the actual content, right? So if people really want to have the best learning experience, I would suggest them to write. Like writing is, I think, the most important part. I create to every video that I put on YouTube a blog post, mainly to make the video more accessible, but also writing about a topic helps me to manifest that understanding about it, right? And then a lot of times editing becomes second. Now, I have, I guess, found different strategies to reduce the editing time, such as recording videos until they are perfect in smaller bits, or just recording a video all in one and see how that goes, and then just putting it out there without much editing. I would love to have somebody to edit my videos, but I don't have the funds for that, so it's not gonna happen. Yeah.
That's a great answer that you gave right there. When you're putting out video content, it can be very consuming. It can really consume you, and your focus can shift from the learning to putting out videos. So how
Yeah.
did you stay true to your learning? That the primary focus was to learn.
That's a great point, and that's, I think, also something that a lot of developer advocates and content creators struggle with, because ultimately you want to create content based on your understanding, on your knowledge, and on your work, right? And if you're consistently putting out content, then one or the other will become less qualitative, right? Like either the videos are amazing and you produce consistently every week 1 or 2 videos, right? But at the same time, the technical content is not as great, because building the technical know-how and showing the technical, like the tutorials and so on, that takes time, right? Some of my tutorials, some of my demos, they take at least a week to produce. And so I can't like potentially do any more videos than I'm putting out there already, because that would require me to need more time to create the tutorials, right? And I think it's really important that you have the understanding of the technology and of what you're sharing with the community to back up your content, right? Like to make your content more qualitative. So it's really this trade-off. So I think the best content creators are actually content creators who don't post on a regular basis, because they are more likely to be the ones who have thought about what do they actually want to put out there, right? Like if you, for example, can't find great people, interesting people to invite to this show, right? And you just invite anybody and people keep listening to your show, eventually maybe the audience will drop, because your show might become less qualitative if you just focus on putting out content without actually the value that you're giving to your audience, right?
Also, like this question came to my mind right now while listening to your
Yeah.
answer, is that you learned so much stuff in such a short amount of time, and you keep
Yeah.
on learning. So I'm sure that you must be knowing what is the best way to learn a particular thing in the shortest amount of time.
I think so. For me, I mean, there have been different strategies on depending on what type of content I wanted to learn. So if you're talking about learning a language, I would tell you something completely different to what I would tell you of learning about a specific technology. I think, and that's something I thought about the other day during my driving lessons. So I was basically thinking about, well, I can study all the theory in the world to learn how to drive. I won't know how to drive, right? Because there's so many edge cases, there's so many narrow roads and situations that you will encounter, and ultimately every car is different, right? And it's the same really with technology. Ultimately, you will only learn a technology from the inside out if you use it as much as possible, right? If you want to learn how to code, you can read code, and you might be able to talk about it, you might be able to understand the code and see what's going on, but ultimately you won't know how to create the code yourself. And that's also something that actually happened to me a lot of times early on, especially in my career, where I was just reading about the theory. I was reading about, for example, how Rust works. I was able a few years ago to read Rust code, but I was never able to write it. I would never attempt to write it because I've never done it, right? Like, I don't think I can do it. Even though I understand what some code does, I can't write it. And I think when you want to learn something new, like in the technology space, it's really important. Like the first thing is try out as much as possible. There's so many open source projects, and that's also ultimately the premise of my content, right? Like just get started with some open source tools, because ultimately that learning experience will teach you so much more than getting any certification or studying for something specifically where you have to know a lot of theory and then fill in check boxes, right? Like if you can show really amazing repositories on your GitHub, then they are much more valuable as like qualifying you for certain things than paying for the certification. And that's really tough to say, because ultimately people will look at the certification before they look at your GitHub account, right? But if you want to learn something and you want to show people that you can talk about it, you have to get your hands dirty. And I think, yeah.
So what do you think, that certificates or proof of work? Where do you stand on this?
So I think there are two angles from it, to it. The first one is that a lot of certificates are just a money-making machine for organizations or individuals. And that's something that I like to call out, because I think it's very exploitive and unfair of how people sell those certifications to the community. Especially when you get started in your career, you won't have the funds to pay for those certificates. And if you later on in your career, again, I would expect somebody who's further ahead in their career to be able to show their skills differently, and that they don't necessarily need certifications to do that, right? So those are kind of the first thoughts that I have on certifications. On the other hand, however, certifications provide a nice, I would say, cookbook on here's what you have to learn to have the minimum knowledge of X, right? So it's a great way, especially for recruiters and other people, to filter out of like, who knows X, right? Like I have a friend and they are recruiting for Kubernetes administrator, Kubernetes engineering roles, okay? The thing is, they get a lot of applicants and people that they interview that actually hardly know how to use kubectl to navigate a Kubernetes cluster. And so having certifications kind of provides you the standard, like a guide of like, this person must have learned X at some point, right? And so in that way, they are great. In that way of like you being able to show what you can do. The thing is that, again, certifications are so standardized that you won't be able to stand out in a unique way with them either, right? So even if you have all of the certifications in the world, what value do you add ultimately, right? Which you will have to answer in different ways, depending on where you're applying it, what you want to do with those certifications and so on, right?
Interesting. So far, we have talked about the content creation journey and technical side of things. Let's shift our focus to Anais as a person. So, so what do you do when you get burned out, or what do you do to relax yourself from, take off time from work?
I like to read a lot, science fiction books and novels, and I like to cook a lot. So that's something I do just to relax. I also do yoga and I meditate on a regular basis, and that kind of helps me to do something completely different that has nothing to do with tech, right? Like, I think it's really important to have this off time of like, I'm not gonna look at my computer for some time, I'm gonna do something else. So if I'm taking time off, or if I'm traveling and so on, you might see me not posting anything about anything tech related.
Right. So as a consumer, where do you spend most of your time? Like Twitter, YouTube, Reddit? Where do you spend most of your time?
I would say Twitter. And I think it goes in the direction of being an addiction. For me, but in a way of, for me, I think Twitter is so incorporated of just my day-to-day work and my life that it becomes really like hassle-free for me to look at Twitter. It's something that I don't even feel like I'm spending time on, versus if I go on Instagram, I would spend unintentionally half an hour on Instagram wasting my time. And that same feeling I don't get when I'm on Twitter, or when I'm on YouTube actually as well. So for technical content, I look at Twitter, YouTube, but also books. Those are, and some blog posts. Those are my main go-to resources. Yeah.
That's a good point. Books and YouTube, right? So how has your YouTube content creation helped you in your journey, in your career? How has it helped you?
I wouldn't necessarily YouTube specifically, but content creation overall. So I got my past 4 jobs actually through people seeing my online content. So the person who was in the hiring position, the hiring manager, saw something that I was doing online and liked my work and liked what I was showing, what I can do in the technical terms, and decided they want to interview and hire me. That was usually the process. And in some of those interviews, like some of those hiring processes, I didn't even have to interview properly. Like, it wasn't a proper interview process because they already knew based on my content what I can or cannot do. So it was usually really straightforward because I was able to show them before I was interviewing, here's my work, take it or leave it kind of style, right? Like, it's ultimately on them, like they can see it. And is that the kind of work they like to have from an employee or not, right? So I think in general, independent on which technologies you're working with or like what your role is, creating content can help you really in the long term of showing your skills. And that could also be like a side project on GitHub. If your style is not writing, but you would like to just work on a project, then that's great. If you like to collaborate with different community members, being active in a Discord channel and helping other people out with their technical questions is also another great way of showing what you can do. A lot of people, for example, focus on Stack Overflow and sharing their knowledge in Stack Overflow, and that's another great tool of sharing your content, right? That doesn't involve blogging or creating videos on a regular basis.
Wow, that is interesting. Like content helped you get 4 jobs. So
Like at least 4
this
jobs.
brings this brings another thing to my mind, is that did your content have views, or it have the right amount of technical stuff in it? You know what I'm saying? That are views what mattered, or is your knowledge, is your way of putting your knowledge out that mattered?
I think to me, the views are really secondary. Obviously, they help in terms of getting traction to your content. But to me, the most important thing is to see how many people are actually then looking at the GitHub repository, at the blog, and actually try out the examples themselves, because those are the people whom I could help with the content I was putting out. If people just watch the video, it's likely an indicator that my content is not as valuable to them as that they would invest the time and recreate a tutorial themselves, right? So that's one part to it. The other part is really just personally, right? I want to learn about new things, and creating the content kind of gives me the excuse of looking at new technologies and new platforms and different projects. And in those terms, it's really important to me that I have a certain technical level on my content, within my content. So a lot of times, actually, I would say I would do more technical things at my work and outside of my content creation. But the thing is, because they're like at a different level that I can't really back up yet with my experience or with my understanding of what's going on, I don't put it on my YouTube channel, because I don't want to risk that I'm telling people something that's not true, that's actually works differently, right? So, and I want to kind of keep that level of credibility of like what I'm putting on my YouTube channel. It's backed up to the best of my understanding, right? Versus there are other things that I'm reading about right now, and I don't yet have the understanding to properly talk about it. Yeah.
That's a great answer right there, Anais, I must say.
Thank you.
Again, do you feel that your audience, like be it on Twitter, be it on YouTube, be it on a blog, can it be transferred to different platforms?
I actually don't think that your audience can transfer in a good way. Like in a good way, I would say. So, and I'm saying that because ultimately I see completely different people subscribing to my weekly newsletter as those people who subscribe to my YouTube channel or the people who are following me on Twitter. They all want to see slightly different content. And producing on all platforms the same content or trying to get people to all of the channels wouldn't be the best approach, I feel, because it would ultimately not as interesting to them. And I would lose out on other people.
When you say creating the same content, do you mean that entirely different content, or just same topic but different way of putting that out?
Oh, that's a good distinction. I think different way of putting it out to some extent, but also different content. So, yeah, to some extent, also different content.
So, if you're creating content on Twitter, on YouTube, on your blog, and you say that you need to make entirely different content on all these platforms, so how do you keep up?
I think it's really like a process of you start with one thing, with one type of content and one type of audience, and then you differentiate further into other content streams, and then it becomes a lot easier over time to add those additional content streams. So for example, right now I'm thinking about ways of how can I start a Patreon, because there are people who would love to have like one-on-one conversations with me, and obviously I don't want to like charge too much, but at the same time I need to monetize my personal time, my free time in some way or another, right? So I'm working on like this additional content stream that will provide more private, more tailored content to a very specific audience who's going to subscribe for that, right? So that has to be again differently to what I'm putting out on YouTube or on my blog. So I think it's really like when you see content creators doing lots of different content, they become kind of used to it, they adapt to it over time in a way, I would say. That doesn't make it easier, but a lot of times you can also rewrite content in different ways for different channels. So that's something I like to do as well, to just provide the same tutorial for presentations as those that go to my YouTube channel and other content streams.
Another thing is that, Anais, if we are learning from video content, right? And we also want to make video content. So it can be pretty easy to just copy that thing. You're not intentionally copying that thing, but it can get copied and you are just duplicating that stuff. So if someone is watching both the contents, they can very easily say that you're copying and this and that. So how do you bring out your original personality in something?
I'm laughing right now because I used to do that a lot. I'm doing it less now, but especially in the beginning, a lot of my early videos, they either just showing the content that I was learning from books in a fairly direct one-to-one way of like having the book and then creating the video on what the person was saying in the book, right? Because ultimately I wasn't able to provide my own input and thoughts and kind of my own ways to approach the problem. So I was literally just copy pasting the problem and the solution for my YouTube channel. And I did that with books, but also with blogs. So if I would come across a really interesting tutorial, or I was looking at a new technology within Kubernetes, a new project, and I want to understand it and learn how to use it, I would look for blog posts that describe to me how to use it and how to navigate that. And then I would just literally show what the blog post taught me, right, on my YouTube channel. The thing is, I would always make sure to give credit to those sources. So if I would copy things, I would say in the video, this video is based on book X. If you want to have the comprehensive version, check out the book, right? So in that way, I think it's a win-win situation, since usually the authors of books don't think about making videos related to the problems and solutions in the book, right? However, there are obviously also scenarios when the best content you can find that explains your topic is video-based content, right? And then you would end up copying quite a bit from the video. And to me, that's completely okay. Like if you find my videos useful and you recreate the tutorials, then please do go ahead. I would be more than happy to see that in the space. I haven't really come across that yet. Now that you mention it, but it would be nice to see that, because ultimately I think even if you approach the same problem and with the same solution that I was showing you, you might add some tiny differences within, or maybe the tutorial that I was creating a year ago doesn't actually work anymore, right? Maybe it has to be updated. So if you want to do an updated version of it, that would be amazing, right? I might not do it because I already looked at those problems and the solutions. So it's not as valuable to me to spend 3 hours or so updating the tutorial, right? I wouldn't get out of having multiple Ingress videos on my YouTube channel, right? Like that wouldn't make much sense to me because I already looked at it, right? From a personal perspective, from a community perspective, it would probably be great to have multiple videos and updated versions of the same thing. From a me perspective of learning about it, it doesn't make much sense. So I would be more than happy if other people do it. Ultimately, videos, GitHub repositories, public ones, everything there is open to everybody. Like, who's going to prevent you from copying it, right? If you copy word by word a book into your blog post, then that's an issue, right? Because that goes against copyright. Like, you shouldn't do that. If you copy anything, I would always put the best effort in giving that person credit, right? Since they put a lot of effort probably into their work. But ultimately, there's nothing preventing you from copying their sentences if you quote it. Right? Who's there to determine that, right? That's the worst thing that can happen.
That's a good perspective to look at things. Okay, so finally, if you get a chance to speak to a younger Anais,
Oh,
what three things would you tell her? It can be content, it can be technical, it can be life, it can be anything.
first thing, don't jump jobs. Don't jump between jobs as much as you did. Bad idea. Don't do it. Um, ultimately, a lot of jobs, a lot of employers, companies have the same issues. So jumping jobs won't maybe give you some more experiences, but it won't ultimately give you more value in the long term, I would say, especially like at the beginning. So that was the first thing. I wouldn't jump as many jobs between jobs. The second thing, read more books. That's something I'm trying to do now. Like, read more books, really. There's nothing that's going to replace the value in the content that you get out of books. Ultimately, the people who write those books, for example, O'Reilly books, they are vetted, right? Like, people looked at them, their skills, what they have been working on, and they make sure it's good quality content. So there's nothing that's going to replace those books. It's the second thing. Then the third thing is, learn how to manage your time. I still struggle with time management a lot, actually, especially when we're talking about replying to people, as you probably have realized, scheduling this stream, this podcast. So that's something that I'm definitely working on, but I'm just very, very bad at it. Just finding the time to answer emails and finding the time to answer emails. That should be like something that you do on a day-to-day basis, just like waking up in the morning, just check your emails. No, for me, it's a big task, usually at the end of the week. So that's like the third thing, really. Yeah.
Cool, awesome.